Hi, Ufo. Um, Good evening. My name is Tabitha Madimusa, and I'm responding to your week one discussion board post in which you try to define or express your understanding of the definition of addiction. And you made reference to the one that resonated with you, being that from McCready and Epstein, where they talked about addiction more as a relapsing disorder, and ties it in with it being neurological um, issue, and also being related to it being a brain disease. I love the fact that you were talking about it. It came from the angle of the scientific explanation of what entails addiction. And you did talk about in neurobehavioral system and how it's I think like the either the activity of the different brain regions as it relates to impulsive decisions, and how they relate to how they react to immediate needs and the circumstances. And you talked about the fact that this the two different regions, that is the executive decision region and the impulsive decision system, kind of maintain a balance in the brain. And you specified that the definition you're most comfortable with was that of Warren, that addiction happens when there's an imbalance between the two neurobehavioral systems. I actually I hear what you're saying, and I did read part of that. And when I was reading it, I was like, it seemed to me like a lot of explanation on what addiction is, and what are the possible, like trying to justify addiction as a brain disease. I do understand the scientific approach of that, but I'm also from a theological aspect. I do understand also, now that I know, first of all, let me state clearly that now that I know that addiction is like has been recognized as a brain disease, and now that not just now, but I've heard of it over time. But after reading the first few paragraphs or chapters of this book, I've come to understand why it's acknowledged as a brain disease. I've come to understand that there have been observation and recommendations and scans and different criteria in which they've used to justify the relapse, the consistent addiction, the different variables that entails what addiction is. But my question remains that it's not just we're not just talking about drug addiction, right? We're not just talking about drug addiction, we're talking about behavioral addiction. So the explanation of what entails both a behavioral and a drug addiction is tied with the fact that most of the actions are involuntary. So this is where empathy comes into play. You get to understand that it's not just a weakness, it's not just a refusal to get over this disease or this behavior, but it's like due to certain aspects, either due to life events, different factors, behavioral, it could be psychological, it could be biological, that's hereditary, it could be from genetics, whatever the explanation is. There entails different criterias of why this has been recognized as a disease, and how psychologists will move forward with knowing what is addiction, what disease or what action or what reaction or what substances, dependence on any of these things constitutes addiction, and that goes into the theory of what addiction is. So if this is based on the fact that addiction is a brain disease that is treatable but cannot be cured, there is no cure for it. So it gives more understanding, because I think the area I battled with was the fact that as Christians, we're saying that there's a vacuum that needs to be filled, and that's because of a disconnect from God. So what happens? How do you explain to those who have no relationship with a supreme being, right? For me, the perspective I always look at is from a Christian. But I found that a bit interesting that the scientific justifies so much of what is considered addictive behavior, and the different approach or how to handle it. But science evolves. That's my issue. Science evolves. What is considered addiction now might not be considered addiction tomorrow. So, like, where does the line? Where is the line drawn? And I understand that for us, as Christian helpers, our question, our while we understand the science of things, we also look at the approach from a Christian perspective. So, from a theological perspective, so how does this all tie in with the vacuum, the need, the consistent and repetitive behavior that cannot be controlled, that is capable of impacting, making an impact on one's life? When does addict, well, who gets to determine? Okay, I get that there are different boards that determine what addiction is. Who gets to decide what is not addiction? When does addictive behavior stop being addictive? Like, when is the next observation going to come that will tell you what is addictive or what is not? I guess those are the few questions I've had. I ended up being more confused. Not confused. I had a lot of thoughts going through my brain after reading this, more than my understanding of what addiction was as a layman. Thank you.